Good evening. I'm here with Mahalia Molema, our latest addition to the BizPreneur team. She has hit the ground rolling, and we are doing our first talk together. Our topic for this evening is on mental health for entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship on its own without the COVID-19 is already a strain on many people. Then you add the curveball of a lockdown, a difficult economy, possibility of your business closing, and you have stress levels hitting the roof. So we just thought today we'll chat about the virus coping skills that we can share with entrepreneurs. We have a few questions that have been sent to us, and we will go through that. We also want to acknowledge that we are doing this talk for many entrepreneurs who are going to watch this, but also especially for the entrepreneurs that are in the TUT, Tshwane University of Technology Center of Entrepreneurship Development. We're just here to support them from a distance with some hints and tips that they can use on their journey. So before we get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Elona Hlatshwayo. I am the founder and CEO of BizPreneur, a consultancy and coaching firm that is there to support entrepreneurs as well as people on a growth path in their careers. I am a master coach, which means I've clocked more than 2,000 paid hours coaching many individuals on their growth journey, and I'm still going. Quite excited about this profession. I'll let Mahalia introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Elona. Hi to everyone watching. My name is Mahalia Molema, and I am a certified executive coach. I basically help entrepreneurs, help them gain self-awareness, clarify their goals, just with the objectives, and also focus more on mental health talks. So I hope that today I'll be able to provide you guys with information that will be able to help you just to gain more clarification on how to just manage your anxiety symptoms or any issues you might be experiencing around your business. So yeah, thank you, Elona.
Thank you very much. So how we're going to structure this, I'll just read some of the questions that have been shared, and then we'll discuss it. So if I'm not looking at the screen, I'm just busy reading the questions, and also some of the questions that will be posted on our comments.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'll just go to the first question. So although we're focused on startups, I think most of the information we'll share today is very important and can be useful for anybody that's finding coping in this time of COVID-19 exceptionally difficult. Okay, so the first question says, what recommendations do we have for people to put in place as dealing with uncertainties in the COVID-19? So what can they do as either coping mechanism, daily habits? What can they do to cope with this uncertainty in this time of COVID-19?
Wow. Okay. So I think starting off with uncertainty, I think as human beings, we just generally like to have a sense of certainty in our lives, and we love that sense of security in the things that we do. But also, I think the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a lot of uncertainty to all of us, especially more so with the startup entrepreneurs, people who have been running their businesses in general. How can they learn to cope with uncertainty is, one, I would always say, how can you challenge the need of certainty? What are the challenges that maybe you can pick up within your own business that are a need of certainty? So maybe starting off in that aspect will be able to help you on how to deal with uncertainty, right? And that then helps you to manage what you can and learn to manage what you can't. But also that also helps with alleviating the stress and alleviating the anxiety of wanting to control everything in your life that you certainly can't manage. So I think it's important for entrepreneurs just to bear in mind of what are the things that they see in their business that can help them to just generally be able to control the things that they can, that allows them to just have that sense of certainty in that direction. And I know, what would you recommend?
So you've touched on something very important that I tend to share with my coachees, that it's very important to be clear on what is in my control and what's not. So imagine spending your day stressing and worrying about something you can't control. Like, I would have loved to not have pimples for this talk, but I couldn't control it. So silly example, but somebody could have stressed the entire day, you know. So as an entrepreneur, there's always going to be things that you can't control that impact you and impact your business. So how do you differentiate between those things that you can control, sort out, and you know, get going, and the ones that you can't? And possibly things have changed with COVID-19. The things that they could control have shifted to being things that they can't control.
That's so true. That's so true.
Okay, so now you've come up with your list and started to say, you know what, this one I can control, and this is what I'm going to do with it. What then do they do with that list? What's the practical thing to do with the list of things that's so out of their control, but is also equally stressful?
I think it's, you know, with what you're saying, it's just taking it back to the basics of the things that we can control and can't. And if you've made this list, then you recognize that these are the things that I can control, is being able to prioritize what's important at that moment in time. You know, I think sometimes we need to be able to acknowledge that there's certain things that my business needs that maybe I should then put that at the top of my list. And there's certain things that may need to be at the bottom. And then when you're able to identify that list and prioritizing what's important, then you take it to a further step of learning to manage managing your tasks of, if I need to do this next week, okay, let me do this, whatever. So being able to have a sense of structure, a sense of system into play, will be able to help the entrepreneurs essentially alleviate the stress in having to just control the things that they can. And moving with that system will just essentially just help them stress less. So yeah, that's the practical side. Yes.
And entrepreneurs are said to be people that are able to adapt, or should be able to adapt, think out of the box, and manage in spaces where other people, you know, see opportunity where other people cannot see opportunity. So that's where those strengths would really come in handy if somebody is in a good space.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've spoken about the stress that comes with uncertainty, and we now want to find out how then can they manage the anxiety thoughts. So the business is not yet closed down, it's still in existence, but you spend your day stressing that I'm probably going to close down, I'm probably going to get broke, I'm going to get bankrupt. How can they manage that, almost that spiraling down into anxiety and almost losing control, even if they're thinking of things that have not yet happened?
I think it's important for us for the entrepreneurs rather, to be able to understand anxiety or stress, and they come into different play. So for example, with stress is something that we will experience essentially, especially when certain things are out of our control, but we can also experience good stress, which then motivates us to continue doing our task, right? And then with anxiety would be sense of feelings of overwhelming, feelings of worry or concern. But how can they manage that? It's being able to understand that, boiling down back to the basics of what can I manage. I'm thinking about maybe the economy and how it's affecting me not being able to get clients, for example. It's what can I do to ensure that even though I'm during the lockdown, I still sustain my business through an income. What can I do in that moment? So for example, I always say, if I'm speaking to entrepreneurs as a client, so it's like for some entrepreneurs, their business would be affected on a seasonal basis. So maybe around summer, it would work for them they would be able to reach their target market much more easier, because their product or their service is insured mostly around that space. But around winter season, for example, then the sales decrease, right? So it's also maybe looking down at the previous reports that they've had in play, or if it's a startup, obviously putting into play to analyze on the table how is my business running, or what are the potential risks of my business. And then from that angle, it helps you to be able to understand what can you do to ensure that I get a sustainable income, or I just alleviate that task at the bottom. So it's taking it in that manner and evaluating where your business is, because every business is different, whether you are in the service industry or in the product industry. So it's important for the entrepreneur to be able to sit down with themselves and look at their business and how as an operation, and what works for them and what does not work for them. So I would be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so you've touched on, you've made me think about that. Not all stress is bad. So some of the stress and the adrenaline rush that we get in those times, sometimes the best ideas come. I mean, we've seen reports of some businesses that have actually totally been able to transform, to grow in this time. So for me, one of the things to think about is, think about letting go of one idea and opening yourself up to additional possibilities.
Yes.
Considering that possibly when you sat and did your business plan, you didn't have a pandemic in the plan. So now you didn't plan for an environment like this, you didn't plan for lockdown, you didn't plan for any of this, and it just comes. So we need to be open to that. Things outside of ourselves, outside of our business, outside of our imagination have landed on each and everybody's plate. So one, I probably am not the only entrepreneur that's going to be stressed or that's facing this change. But just like you were able to identify opportunity when you first started off, what are the opportunities now?
Yes.
Because you still have that creative brain, you still have the talents that you had that got you started. What are the opportunities there? So for me, that would be one thing to start to think about, to say, you know what, the thing that's going to be a differentiator here for me is that I still have that vision for my business. It's now possibly thinking about how else to do things. But like we've both professionally found that not all anxiety is the same.
Absolutely.
I may be sitting at home feeling like this is just normal stress.
Yes.
How do you know when it's actually at a stage where you need to contact somebody, you need an intervention external to yourself? So without negating that everybody goes through stress, sometimes there is a point where you need extra help. So how would they establish that?
I think what's important is entrepreneurs need to be able to understand themselves, and it goes back to self-awareness, but also importantly, knowledge is power. So with them understanding the symptoms that anxiety comes with. But with anxiety, for example, you'll be experiencing overwhelming feelings, worry, fear, chest pains, headaches for maybe a period of 2 weeks or so. But when it starts affecting your day-to-day, and like you mentioned, creativity as an entrepreneur, it's one of the elements that makes you see an opportunity and want to be able to run with that, right? So when you see that you no longer be able to want to do your task, you have low energy, you're no longer feeling to want to be productive, that's where you should start questioning what's really happening with me. And then you'll be able to then start, when you're able to identify this, you would then start either going to want to see your GP, or there's a lot of access social workers at the local clinic, for example, or you can just speak to a coach that might be available as working around mental health, for example, or with your psychologist. That's when you know that you need type of help. That's it of guidance. Sometimes you just need guidance on how to manage your symptoms, right? You don't necessarily need to see a GP, but it's just basically saying, okay, I'm not coping right now. I just need someone to be able to steer me back into the correct decision, because I'm not having great coping skills. So therefore, being able to find your coaches, your psychologists who can be able to help you just with those coping skills to be able to navigate your performance moving forward.
Awesome. Okay, so one of the key things I'm picking and I'm hearing from this is that if you didn't have self-awareness in the first place, then it becomes difficult to see that right now I am coping, or right now this is normal for me and this is not. So it's important to have time with yourself as an entrepreneur. What's happening with me? What's happening around me? How am I reacting to it? So you need to always understand, am I feeling the right emotions right now for the right things that are happening? Am I crying because something that deserves me crying happened? Am I laughing instead of crying? Those are some of the things that you need to see. I mean, a lot of people will say things like you need to be strong, but you need to also have those conversations with yourself to say, is this really the correct emotions to be feeling right now? Because there is a time to cry and a time to laugh. And
Absolutely.
you need to almost check within yourself, am I
Where you are at
correctly right now? Yes.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with that.
So one of the things a client of mine said a few weeks ago was, there is no punctuation anymore between your personal life and your professional life. It's all been fused into one place. And that's why we're seeing a lot of people working late, a lot of people almost not stopping to work unless they're going to sleep, because it's just so easy. The computer is right there, right? What kind of things can they do to separate the personal life and the business life? Because right now it's quite blurry.
It is. I think you mentioned adapting earlier on, and I think we're all trying to adapt working from home, because I think I've seen that working from home actually saves time to traveling to a specific place or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, for an entrepreneur who needs to go and see a client, it's a different story for them, right? Being able to separate your personal and business life, sometimes it is quite a thin line between the two. And I know, for example, you mentioned creativity for some entrepreneurs. So they would have maybe an idea around 12 a.m. and then they want to jot it down and so forth. But for me, what's important before I answer the question is understanding, so for example, our brains and how they work, right? If we constantly going to upload or feed it with a lot of information, it ends up spiraling in overwhelming thoughts or feelings, right? Because we're not then resting necessarily the way we should. And we want to be working for sure like 16 hours in a day and sleep for 5 hours, and everybody's strategy is different, right? And I think that's what's important that entrepreneurs need to be able to understand. Everybody's system is different. I think what's important, it boils down to self-awareness. Knowing yourself, knowing what's important, know that my body rests in so many hours, or when I'm eating, I need a certain food in my body to be able to feel okay. So when you know yourself, then it's easier to be able not to allow yourself to take so much into your business life. But at the same time, if you're the type of a person that get creative with constantly working, it's important to always implement self-care. So self-care will be just be able to have time where you're going to unplug, or doing something that basic, being able to walk, or just being able to have a video call with a friend. So it's important just to basically know yourself, and that from that element, it will be easier to be able to know that how am I going to separate my life and I'm going to separate business life, because sometimes it's easily to miss the two, and we can integrate it so easily together. But what's important is just being able to understand what works for you as an entrepreneur, and when do you draw the line between the two, because for you, maybe what works for you is that you can sleep at 12 a.m. and you'll still be fresh tomorrow and be productive. And that might not work for me because I'll be yawning the whole day, the following day. So it's important that you know what system are put in place for yourself as an entrepreneur, and where your business is at that moment in time.
Awesome. So one of the things I've been saying to a couple of people is that the point of the lockdown is that you come out of it whole and well. So besides the COVID-19, if we're going to work ourselves to the bone and break down our immune systems because we're not resting, we're probably not eating right, we're just burying ourselves in work, it defeats the purpose to say stay home, be safe, and be well, because then you easily catch other infections, you get the headaches, you can spiral into something else. So it's very important to focus on what was the point of this exercise. So yes, perhaps you're working on making sure that your business is at the top when everything's back to normal, but your business cannot be at the top if the person running the business is not whole. So that's so important. I personally know that I need a lot of sleep. Otherwise I'm not very effective.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Sleep is very important for all of us. It helps us to be able to, it's time to, to rejuvenate our energy and to be able to perform at our optimal level.
Yeah. So also another aspect of separating my personal life and my business life is that if this is a habit that I'm developing, maybe I haven't done it before the lockdown. If this is a new habit that I'm developing, what's important is that my disappointment at work does not define who I am as a person. So when things don't go well with BizPreneur, it doesn't mean that Elona as a person is like finished and so on, because this is what we are picking up on. Life is not meaningful anymore because my business is not running.
Correct.
So when your personal identity is so well knitted into your business and you see nothing else outside of your business, for me that's a red flag. I'm not sure what you think.
I would second that. It is a red flag because I think it boils down to language, and attachment. So as human beings, we have this thing that when we're not good at a task, we like to attach ourselves to its failure, to be like, yeah, I'm not good at tennis, I'm not good at this, or I failed at this rather. Or for example, if someone is learning how to cook or bake, and the scones don't come out the same, and you're like, no, I failed at baking the scones. So, maybe the strategy you used didn't work, or maybe you needed to do something different. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're a failure, but it just means that you might not be good at that particular task. So the language we use and how we attach it to ourselves, it's very important. So I think sometimes with entrepreneurs, if they don't know how to detach, and this comes back to the personal and business question, to be like, how do you separate the two? This is when it comes into play that the business, yes, it's the role that you play, it's not who you are. And the moment entrepreneurs start to understand that, it is much easier to start using that type of language to be like, this is my business, but also I am myself at the same time. So therefore, if I'm not good at a particular task, or I didn't win with a specific client, or I didn't get that tender I needed, then it doesn't mean that I have failed. It's coming back to the drawing board and finding a different system or finding a different strategy to be able to implement so that it's going to work for me and be able to move forward with that. So yeah, it's very interesting how we just like to attach ourselves to failure as human beings, hey?
Yes. I think it happens more often with the failure than the success. And
absolutely.
It begs the question, what's our relationship with failure? I'm just wondering if we have any questions. So I'm just going to check on the page.
Okay.
Okay, we'll get them as we go along. So on that note of failure, I had a business. My first business was probably 12 years ago.
Okay.
Somewhere there. And the business closed down, but Elona didn't close down, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We're still going. And I'm sharing this because most startups believe that the very first thing we tried was the thing that worked out, and it's the thing that's grown. So it's important to also, as an entrepreneur, get to understand the journey of entrepreneurship is actually, it can be murky, it can have a lot of detours, and a lot of people stop and ask them how the journey was. They'll tell you of a lot of obstacles and so on. And for me, that gives comfort to say, oh, okay, I'm not the first person to encounter blocks, closed doors, tenders not awarded. I mean, the list goes on. And if I chose to focus on those, when I get a no, for me, my personal habit is, what can I learn from that process? What can we do better? You know, going back to saying, let's check the DNA of the business. Were we actually in the right space? Is this actually what we should be doing? You know, are we aligned with this thing that we're trying to do, right? And it's important to learn from the failure and not to be the failure.
Yeah.
So from that first step of saying, my business is this and I am this.
Correct,
you know,
correct.
Then you can celebrate the success of the business and also learn from the failure, but not to be the success of the business or the failure of the business.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're part of it.
I think even touching on the success, one thing I've recognized is that when you achieve something, we comprehend it for a couple of hours, and then the next following day we want to rush to the next thing. You know, we don't allow ourselves to continue embracing that. Or even when we are experiencing the failure and we look behind and be like, what have I done, or what steps have I taken to get, you know, great results previously? Even though in this moment, for example, I have failed at this particular task or my business didn't work out, we need to continuously have a system in play that is going to allow us to remind us where we started or why we initially started something. Because if we're going to continuously be in a system where we're going to wallow in our failure and we think that we failed because of that particular company, for example, ending, or not having your first client, or someone telling you this is not good, whatever the case may be, you are taking that and wanting to wear it. So what's important is understanding, for example, your vision and your values. I think I always stress with my clients that when we operate from understanding where your values are based, then it becomes easier for you to be able to remind yourself of when you're experiencing the failure, to be like, this is not who I am, but it is what I have done. And then I'm going to learn to move forward and be the best person I can be. So, yeah.
So we've got a comment from Esther who says, sometimes when she's just relaxing, she feels like she should stand up and continue working, even though she's tired, because she's at the startup level. So almost feeling guilty to stop because there's just so much to build, so much to do. What are your thoughts around that?
I think the feelings she's experiencing or the emotions she's experiencing are normal, firstly, and she shouldn't feel as if there's something wrong with her. But what I found, what's important is always find people in your same industry forward. If she's in the product or service industry, doing something similar, to be able to start questioning or asking them how they did specific things. So networking and being part of entrepreneurship groups helps a lot to feel like you're not alone. You know, because sometimes as an entrepreneur can be such a lonely road, especially when you're starting. And I was having a thought to myself that building a business, it's very hard, but maintaining and sustaining it, it's something twice even harder. So it's important for her just to be able to get herself a networking tool, a group to be involved in, so that she does not feel down all the time. And when she does, she has someone to be able to help her navigate that space better.
Awesome. I think you've really nailed it, that we shouldn't try and do it alone and try and do it all today. So I have those traits, sometimes still a problem, that I am a finisher. So if I start something, and sometimes you need to step back and tell yourself, this is not possible to finish this today or this week, you know? It's a marathon and not a sprint. And when you allow yourself that in order for me to have good output, I cannot and should not finish this in one day or in. So thinking about pacing yourself and making it almost, is the quality actually improved when you work without resting?
True.
Is the experience better for our clients? Is, you know, if you start to speak of who are you delivering to. So when you don't rest and you just pour yourself into this project and you don't sleep, or and no breaks, then you'd say, in the bigger scheme of things, when I take that 2-hour break of self-care, I come back better.
Absolutely.
One of our values at BizPreneur is you grow better when you're balanced. And for me, balance is very important, because when I've exhausted my creative brain, even if I stay up for another 12 hours, it's not going to be productive.
That's not going to be.
So it's feeding another narrative that you need to work harder and longer in order for you to produce good work.
That
so
is
back
correct.
to what you mentioned about self-awareness and knowing when to stop, knowing what your body needs. Start to identify what needs to be in place for me to do well. And
Correct.
It's not always long hours.
It's not. I think also with the long hours is that people need to remember that they might have teams there, especially for startup entrepreneurs, that you're alone and you have to take care of every department of the business. So it's also just reminding yourself that you can't compare yourself with someone, if you're a startup, for example, with someone who's been in the game for 5 years, but also what tools can I learn from the person that's going to help me put maybe perhaps my style into making the business work for me and my own strategy in it. So yeah, I hope this helps her.
We have another comment question from Bukosi. She's got 9 to 5, 8 to 5 actually, and then she's got a business as well, a side hustle. So this adds to the pressure, and she's studying out. And so she says she finds that in the end, she'll work almost through the night so that she can deliver for her clients. And then in the morning, it's back to work. So what advice can we give pertaining to this? Because fitting in mental well-being has been a challenge, and she's almost feeling like she's reaching burnout. Balancing the 9 to 5 and the side hustle, because not everybody can start full-time and full on. So some people will start, juggling the two, or they will continue to juggle the two, and no need to quit the 9 to 5.
Sure. I think what's important is, for me, the belief I have is not every opportunity is an opportunity. So what I mean by that is that she's starting out, and if she's getting a lot of clients, she needs to assess what clients can she be able to serve to her base optimal, and which clients will she not be able to be serve at her base optimal. Because yes, the business starting out, but it sounds like she's gaining a lot of clients, which is great. But if you now want to be able to impress all the clients, remember that you're not only just serving a once off, you're hoping that the client will be consistent and come back. In terms of your business and the product you're providing. So it's like you said, that it's providing quality service to the client at all times. And for example, if you're selling a product, clients don't only look at your product, but they also look at how you interact with them, the feedback you give to them. So it's things like that you need to put into play. And if you're going to have 10 clients and you have a 9 to 5, it's going to wear you out, because then how are you going to be able to deliver constantly? And for example, if you come home, when do you rest? Because in between that, you need time to be able to rest so that you can be recuperate. So it's something maybe she needs to, I would say, take a step back and evaluate how many clients can she take in a week, in a month, that will be able to help her sustain, perhaps whether it's an income or reaching her client-based targets, or whatever the case may be for her, so that it'll be able to help her also sustain the continuum of having clients and maintaining the business and herself at the same time. Okay,
so we've established that she probably enjoys doing this, and sometimes that's the trap.
Yeah.
That because you're doing something you love, best. But my advice there is to also look at the turnaround times. What I've spoken about, that it doesn't need to be one day. You need to take into account, add an extra day or two, and don't try and do it in one day.
Yes.
Because in as much as maybe she's going to be awesome to her clients, let's picture the split side to say, how are you going to be to your colleagues at work when you're tired? How are you going to be to your team? Are you going to be pleasant? Are you going to be productive? So we just need to think about ways to balance, and also by stretching. The only place where I would advise stretching, stretch your deadlines in your business. have realistic ones that take into account that should something happen, I still have one day as a buffer. Don't do things overnight, because it only comes back to bite you. So the client will say, yes, I understand it might not be your best, but they might go back and say, actually, the service wasn't great. They won't share. I gave it to her at 4 p.m. and I expected it the next morning.
Yeah.
It often happens like that. So try and think about that. At the end of this all, what do I want the client to experience? And what do I want them to share with others? So being the fastest is not always best. Being the cheapest is not always best. The main thing is, at the end of the day, they're talking about the quality of output that they've got out of it. Was it worth what I paid? Yeah. So we've spoken about, somebody says they struggle to fall asleep if stuff is not finished. You know, almost like there's so many tabs, so many things left undone.
Of course.
So, bedtime routines or self-care around being able to get to shut down.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Routines, self-care is important. I think a lack of sleep or not being able to sleep is a sign of anxiety, because then your brain is already telling you that you're overwhelmed, there's so much pressure, your body and your brain can no longer cooperate and is no longer aligned. So it's important for the person to be able to evaluate that, one, what is the quality that I want to provide to my clients, like you mentioned, and also quality to myself. I think we should not forget that it's important for an entrepreneur to be able to provide healthy self to the client and be able to be the best optimal. But what's important also, I mentioned, I think earlier, that planning ahead, for example, it's always important, keeping a step ahead. And I think you mentioned that if you can't finish it today, you can finish it tomorrow, whatever the case may be. But it's also training your brain more than so, because we can train our brain. That's the reality. We need to be able to teach our brain that it's time for us to sleep, it's time for us to rest. And it might take a couple of days for the person to actually get into that routine back again. But if they're going to continue not being able to sleep because they didn't finish a task, you're teaching your brain that if a task is not finished, even in future, I'm not going to shut down. But it's important for them to remind themselves that, you know, when your performance level, it can only be great when you have maintained your rest, and sleeping is important.
Awesome. And that speaks to the narratives that we tell ourselves. How do you measure success? Most times people measure themselves by writing this incredibly long to-do list that in the first place, if you look at it, you're like, really? Was this ever going to be possible? But anyway,
Absolutely.
This is what they measure their day or their success for the day. And I have said to somebody, and it worked quite well for them because they're quite hard on themselves. This is a high achiever who's achieved quite a lot of things, but cannot sleep because there's 3 things that's not done out of a list of 20. Right? So when we speak about training the brain, it's important to train your brain to look at the 17 things that are done instead of the 3 that's not done. Tick off, not even tick off, write a list of the things you achieved. And with the mind that when I've achieved one thing and I've achieved it well, that is an achievement. And not to say, I've done 101 things and I forgot one thing, and that's the thing that I'm measuring myself on. So that narrative is not very kind to yourself. So our idea on self-care is not just sleeping, it's not just your physical. We need to be kind to ourselves. That is caring for yourself. The narrative that you say to yourself, how do you measure yourself? How do you address yourself? Do you call yourself a success? Do you call yourself an achiever? Do you call yourself somebody that goes out there to get what they want? Or do you remind yourself of all the things that haven't gone well? And when you do that, your relationship with trying and taking opportunities, it starts to have a gap. Because in your mind, I've failed. The last week I failed at everything. I have so many things that's not done. Add that to not sleeping, then you're not going to be functioning rationally.
Correct.
So I think it's important to maybe be intentional about that narrative. What is your personal narrative? What do you call yourself?
Yeah, that's true. I think also, like you're saying, that it's intentional but it also requires practice. I think, like you mentioned, that kindness, it's so easy to give it sometimes, but it's not easy for us to be able to give it to ourselves. And that also does require practice. And in everything we do, whether it's a strategy or system, whatever we put in place as an entrepreneur, we need to put it into practice, which is the most important part, that will be able to help her move forward with the sleeping issues. Yeah.
Awesome. So if it doesn't work today, don't count today. Tomorrow, try and fall asleep again.
Tomorrow, it's another day. Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, on that last point is just before you go to bed is not the time to appraise your day. It's not the time to say what was done right and what was not done right, because you're taking that into your bedtime and it's not right. So possibly to almost take a clean break from work.
Correct.
And listen to something positive, do your affirmations, journal, whatever you do just before you go to bed. But it must be something that's positive. And you go to bed thinking about, I'm enough, I'm courageous. Today I did such amazing things, and that reminds me that I am brave, I'm talented. Instead of saying, I just didn't finish the stuff I was supposed to do. And so it remains as unfinished tasks, making you anxious in your sleep.
Sure.
So that actually we've answered the fourth question, which was how should they process failure and be able to overcome failure? So my biggest one is, what is the narrative? What story are you telling yourself about yourself? What's the story you're telling yourself? Because before we tell other people, if we think there's no story we're telling ourselves, you just have to hear somebody says, I experienced her as not so confident. And when she wasn't confident, that was informed by something she told herself. I'm not going to get this tender, but I'm standing here and I'm pitching. That's something you've told yourself, and it informs how you perform. So when it comes to failure, what stories do we tell ourselves after we get that no, after we get that disappointment, after we are locked down almost indefinitely? What narrative are you telling yourself? And is it building you towards growing your business, growing more ideas and opportunities, or is it leaving you stuck?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wouldn't have said it better. It is how you tell yourself. Sometimes you know, I remember when I was starting out becoming an entrepreneur, and having to pitch in front of people is so overwhelming and scary. And then you will start creating all these thoughts in your head. You're like, no, I'm not going to do this. I can't do this. They're going to ask me this. And what if I can't answer? What if this happens? So the moment you start creating those thoughts and you believe them, and by the time you get there, no words are going to come out, because you're suddenly so overwhelmed to the point that you cannot deliver, even if what you had to say was an amazing pitch, you know. But what's important also is having, or rather sprinkling, a sense of confidence in yourself and a little of kindness that comes back to that. So it's also being able to process it, and being able to, when you feel it, relax, reflect, and just release it. You know, that's important. And then taking it from there. And it all just brings practice, comes with practice rather.
Awesome. So when we start to replay that narrative we're telling ourselves about being a failure, about being stuck, some of it needs an intervention which is outside of the entrepreneur. So we touched on it a little bit, but because we are almost closing off, I think it's something we need to almost repeat, because there is an increase in mental health cases. People who have experienced it are experiencing it now. And when we say contact your psychologist, perhaps somebody doesn't have a psychologist because they've never thought mental health is something they need to look after.
That happens. Yeah.
So what are the practical techniques that people can do to look after? So, you know, we proactively talk about looking after your physical health, exercise, eat well. And we know it's linked to your mental health, but what else can be done to look after your mental health during this time?
Okay. I think the first one, I've mentioned it already, and that is knowledge is power. We need to be able to start having conversations about mental health, especially in the space of entrepreneurship, because I think it's always diverted to start a business or start a side hustle or whatever the case may be, that always promotes that someone needs to be able to have that space. But not everybody has the confidence. But what's important is knowing yourself. So knowledge is power in the sense of know yourself, know what your values are, know what drives you, and have also a sense of understanding what mental health is, understanding the symptoms of anxiety, understanding the symptoms of depression. So that will be able to, you'll start being able to recognize it better when you have the information, whether in yourself or maybe on your other fellow entrepreneur. So it starts from that basic. Two, I always say that have a support system in play. You might not have a support system from family or friends, but there's a lot of Facebook pages or any other social media platforms that provide entrepreneurship spaces. I know there's also other WhatsApp groups that have entrepreneurship communication there, being able to tell you or help you in general. That is important, because you can never do entrepreneurship alone. You know, you might run the business alone, but you need other people's input in saying, how did you do this? How did you do that? And also researching is important. I think the third part I would say is researching. So for example, just if you're starting out, especially the startups, is that if you're trying to find your niche or you're trying to find your style into that specific industry, it's important to look at maybe 5 other entrepreneurs who started already in that business, see how they do things, see how they've structured it, and so forth, and what can you incorporate that's your own personality in that space, and that will be able to alleviate your stress. And I always say, eat healthy, be conscious of what you eat, because it goes a long way. I think we never put this into play, but it's important for us to be able to aware to eat not necessarily healthy, but be conscious of what we eat, rather. Let me say that, right? And last but not least, being able to exercise. And exercising, I don't mean go to the gym, but just generally be able to walk around, you know, just be able to walk around, be able to move your body, because your body gets tired, especially with the information you might be providing to it. And when it's tired, it provides you with that low energy, and then you no longer can perform, and you wonder what's happening with me. But you're sitting, for example, the whole day in the house, and you're eating, and you only walk when you go to the kitchen. But it doesn't work that way, you know. But I would put this into play for the entrepreneurs to use this. And I always say that it requires practice. Yes, it's easy things that maybe they may know, and you're like, oh, you're telling me what I know. But most of us, how many of us do we really put this into play or become conscious of it, and how important it is for us to be effective in what we are providing?
Okay.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I just thought of something. I think one possible thing to think about doing at this time is maybe do an audit of what's happening in my business, what's happening in me, and start to remove those activities and engagements that are draining you right now. Because the last thing that everybody needs is, on top of being stressed and worrying about your business, worrying about your health, worrying about should I even go to the mall and so on, is then having negative energy around you. So I'm not saying people should live in a bubble and everybody should just praise you even though you're messing up. But you should be very careful about who is almost pouring into your narrative, because you're building the story about yourself. And depending on who's around and who you're letting influence that, you could almost get back to level 0 if you're not around listening to things that encourage you, around people that will give you positive information, who will give you insights of go and research this in this place. If you're not intentional about what am I placing in my sphere, what's going into my narrative, you might find that you come out of this feeling drained emotionally and mentally. And obviously it spills over to the physical, because we are connected beings. So we can't stress it enough. Exercise has been shown to help with your mental health. So I'm going to say, go for that walk, go for that jog, get the fresh air and sunshine.
Yeah, or be on the bicycle, whatever that works for you, do that, or skip rope, whatever the case may be, but do something.
It's important to be active. So I'm just going to check for more questions, and maybe Mahalia, you can give us any closing comments. We have 7 minutes to go, so I'm going to pause and see if we have any more questions while you give us your closing remarks.
Okay. I think the closing for me is it's time for us as entrepreneurs to start supporting each other. It's important to support each other because, like I said, and we'll emphasize that entrepreneurship is such a lonely road, and being able to have other people when you're feeling not so ambitious, it's important for you to surround yourself with people who are going to be able to help you get back to the game, or people who will just be able to encourage you, but also true, I would say that your mental health is important. If you want to start a business, your mental health is important because your mental health affects your finances, it affects your performance level, it affects your interaction with people around you. So it's important for you to be able to gain that sense of knowledge with yourself and understand mental health in general and how it can come to play in decreasing you into performing at your best level. So that would be my closing statement to the entrepreneurs, to also just take care of themselves, Yeah.
Awesome. So for me, my closing points is that it's important to be open to get help.
Mm-hmm.
When you feel that you are feeling down, no matter how much you try, there's nothing positive you can think of to change your business, bring it back up, make sure you get clients and so on. It is what it is right now. Mm-hmm. Be open to getting help, because like we've said throughout the talk, it is something that you cannot do on your own. You cannot lift yourself out of a pit of depression.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It is actually a medical condition, and there are places where you can get help. But the first thing is you need to be honest with yourself and say, actually, this is not me. This is not how I deal with things. And understand that your behavior and your state of mind impacts those around you. So it could be your family and not even the clients and so on, since the businesses are on hold and so on. It could just be the people you live with. So start to think about having those daily habits that ensure that you're at your best. If tomorrow your business had to open and go back to optimum, would you be in a position to operate fully? Or would there be things that you need to change? Would there be things that you need to start to fix because you've been sitting in this pit of overwhelm and anxiety? So it's important to start to think about day to day. I eat, I sleep, I drink water for my physical health. What am I doing for my mental and emotional health?
Correct.
Awesome. We have 3 minutes, and I actually got one more question. So this person has a fear of failure. And with fear of failure, what do we recommend they can do? The failure hasn't happened yet. And so they are on this perpetual journey of thinking, if I don't stop working on my business and changing things and improving things, I'm going to fail. What would you advise for fear of failure?
I think for me, it would be more of a direct question to her, not advice, is that one, what would then be the loss if she had to experience the failure, for example, right? And where does the need of being scared? So where does being the need of that I'm going to fail come from? So questioning yourself from that, I think then that will be able to make her understand the sense of failure and how the person can deal with it moving forward. Because sometimes we can easily give someone advice and not be able to practice it at times, right? But when we start being able to change the narrative, like you always say, that what is my need of constantly saying I'm going to fail in this particular task? Does it come from somewhere? What do they do with that? That particular failure. I think as human beings, as I've mentioned in the beginning, that we have the ability to adapt. We have the ability to be able to overcome, and they can be able to overcome it. But when the person starts questioning themselves as to why am I so afraid of failure? What could be the worst thing that's going to happen if I fail? And how is that reflected on me as a person? And then when the person's able to answer that, then they'll be able to just get the answer from those questions, or the direct questions they can ask. I don't know what you would maybe recommend for her.
Okay, so I think for me, fear of failure sometimes also is, it shows that there is a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
As communities, when an entrepreneur does not do well, they're almost labeled as that's the person who tried to do this and it never worked for years and years and years. You know, that's the person who thought they could leave the 9 to 5 and it didn't work and they went back and so on. So I think one of the things as a greater community is to change our mindset when it comes to failure of entrepreneurship, because that's a learning journey and they can come back with greater lessons than if they'd never tried it. There's so much to learn if you try, and if you never tried, you never actually you lose the experience. So directly to answer her, it's on your fear of failure, right? What opportunities are you preventing yourself from experiencing by remaining stuck in the fear of failure? The fear of failure is said to kill more dreams than actually doing it. So sometimes because the narrative is already, I'm going to fail, then we don't try it because we've already told ourselves it's going to go bad and so on. And yet there was success waiting for us in the future. So it's important to say, okay, if I succeed, I succeed. If I fail, then I've learned. So my personal philosophy is failure is only when I've not done anything with the lessons that come out of it.
I like that. I like that answer. It reminds me of the poem Our Greatest Fear by, I think it's Maureen Wilson, if I'm not incorrect. She talks about that our greatest fear is that we think us dimming our light will potentially switch on someone else's light. But when you switch on your own light, it automatically switches everyone else's light in the room, you know? So the person should be able to read that poem. It's such a great poem to be able to have and continuously read, especially around fear of failure. Because we all, I think, well, I'll not like to assume, but most entrepreneurs, we have a sense of fear that we will fail, you know, or we become nervous about a particular task or something. But that's why I'm saying, what's the worst that could happen, you know? It's always trying, like you mentioned. So yeah, that's the journey of entrepreneurship, hey? Yes.
So I'm going to close our talk now, but I just want to thank everybody that's been with us for the past hour, and also thank the TUT Center for Entrepreneurship Development for all the work that everybody is doing to support entrepreneurs. BizPreneur exists to fill in that gap. We know that none of your problems are permanently solved in the 1 hour, but we start the journey today. We start to think about what narratives are we telling ourselves. We start to identify, what am I feeling? Where's the overwhelm coming from? And from there, there's more things to do. There's more work to do as an individual to maintain and also improve your own mental health in this time and beyond COVID-19. Thank you, Mahalia. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, we look forward to having more talks like this.
Perfect. Anytime. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that